Good morning. This morning's reading is taken from Habakkuk 3, verses 1 through 16. That's on page 1459, I think, in the Pew Bibles. Check before it came up. Habakkuk 3, 1 through 16. A prayer of Habakkuk the prophet on Shigionoth, which I'm sure I'm saying wrong, which is believed to be a term from literature or music. Lord, I have heard of your fame. I stand in awe of your deeds, Lord. Repeat them in our day. In our time, make them known. In wrath, remember mercy. God came from Teman, the Holy One of Mount Paran. His glory covered the heavens, and his praise filled the earth. His splendor was like the sunrise. Rays flashed from his hands where his power was hidden. Plague went before him. Pestilence followed his steps. He stood and shook the earth. He looked and made the nations tremble. The ancient mountains crumbled and the age-old hills collapsed, but he marches on forever. I saw the tents of Cushan in distress and dwellings of Midian in anguish. Were you angry with the rivers, Lord? Was your wrath against the streams? Did you rage against the sea when you rode your horses and your chariots to victory? You uncovered your bow, you called for many arrows. You split the earth with rivers. The mountains saw you and writhed. Torrents of water swept by. The deep roared and lifted its waves on high. Sun and moon stood still in the heavens at the glint of your flying arrows, at the lightning of your flashing spear. In wrath you strode through the earth, and in anger you threshed the nations. You came out to deliver your people, to save your anointed one. You crushed the leader of the land of wickedness. You stripped him from head to foot. With your own spear you pierced his head when his warriors stormed out to scatter us, gloating as though about to devour the wretched who were in hiding. You trampled the sea with your horses, churning the great waters. I heard and my heart pounded. My lips quivered at the sound. Decay crept into my bones and my legs trembled. Yet I will wait patiently for the day of calamity to come on the nation invading us. Cody, the time's yours.
Good morning.
Good morning, Cody.
The past few weeks that have been broken up by guest speakers and things, but the past few weeks that I've been preaching, we've been talking about the book of Habakkuk. In our past lessons, we explored Habakkuk's questioning of God. Habakkuk was upset about the sin in Judah and asked God, why don't you do anything? Why have you not answered my prayers for you to intervene? What are you doing? And then God answered and said he was sending the Babylonians. And Habakkuk liked that even less. And started questioning God. How could you use someone even more wicked than us to punish us? You hate sin. What are you doing? You can't mean this, can you? And then the next lesson, the next chapter, we see Habakkuk saying, God, I'm going to wait for your response. I'm going to wait for you to correct me because I'm probably wrong about something. And God gives him an answer and says, I am going to punish the Babylonians as well. But it's going to take some time. You're going to have to wait. And so that was the focus of our last lesson, waiting for God to intervene, waiting with hope. And this week we're going to continue to explore Habakkuk. Now, I don't know how many of you know, I think I've probably mentioned it at some point or another, but I have obsessive compulsive disorder. Now, first of all, that is not the desire to make things clean. That's a bit of a misconception. It's a lot more than that. Typically, it's the inability to let something go. And it's the belief that if you don't fulfill whatever compulsion it is, it could be to keep things clean, It could be flick a light switch 10 times. For the record, that's not mine. And the irrational belief that if you don't fulfill this compulsion, disaster is going to happen. Now, for me, it was just a nonstop disruptive thoughts that attacked my faith when I was in high school and shortly after. I fought with it for years, and I didn't tell anyone because I thought I was crazy. And it made me withdraw more and more from people, and unfortunately, as much as I wanted to be closer and closer to God, it made me feel farther and farther away. I felt with these blasphemous, sacrilegious thoughts that I couldn't seem to get rid of. It felt wrong to approach him in prayer. It felt wrong to read the Bible, and so I kept falling farther away, despite wanting the opposite. I begged God for several years to heal me, to take that away. And I started out hopeful. But as I waited longer and longer, that hope faded and became despair. I reached a point where I broke down to my mother and said, God's not real. I hate him. Because I felt like he'd abandoned me. And then I started crying, and the truth was, it came out. I was like, I just want God to love me. I don't feel like he loves me. Why hasn't he helped me? It was really hard to go through the worst struggle of my life and have to wait and not know what was coming. Now, for the record, God did end up rescuing me, but it took a lot longer than I wanted. And it took things getting even worse. It took me finally breaking down to my mom and saying I wish I was dead. It had to get bad enough for me to let go of my pride and my fear of people thinking I was crazy and say I have a problem. I spoke out of my pain. And it turns out that is what God was waiting for. But then he rescued me through a series of amazing events. I got in to see doctors so fast, and it was amazing. Waiting was hard, and waiting with hope was even harder. It is hard to maintain hope when things are difficult. Typically, and I don't think I'm alone in this, the longer we wait for something, the less we hope. The longer that promotion at work takes, the less you hope you're going to get it. The longer we wait for that loved one to call, and they don't, start to lose hope that they will. And the more difficult your situation is, the harder it is to wait. Waiting for that healing of sickness or mental illness, for yourself or for others. The longer you wait, the less you seem to have hope. Waiting for financial relief, that's something that a lot of us are dealing with the cost of living these days. God, when's this going to get better? Cost of life, debt. And as time goes by, we start to lose hope that it's going to get better. The list goes on. Waiting for relief from pain, waiting for peace, for these wars to stop, for the terrorists to be stopped. Soon we have a hard time seeing anything but the suffering and the struggle. This is where Habakkuk chapter 3 comes in. Habakkuk has been told to wait with hope of God's intervention. And so chapter 3 shows us Habakkuk's response. And I believe this is the response that will help us maintain hope. God told him that Babylon's punishment is coming. Babylon's coming as punishment for Judah, which will bring great suffering. But if he waits, God will punish them too. Now, my first question, and I want you to think about these things. How would you respond in Habakkuk's situation? If God is doing something and you're going to suffer and struggle through it, but he says, wait, it'll get better, how would you respond? How have you responded? I'm sure we've all been in that situation. How would you maintain your hope? Well, let's look at Habakkuk's response and keep those thoughts in mind. A prayer of the prophet Habakkuk according to the Shigionoth. Lord, I have heard the report about you. Lord, I stand in awe of your deeds. Revive your work in these years. Make it known in these years. In your wrath, remember mercy. Habakkuk, he petitions God. He petitions him based on his works in the past and says, God, bring those works back. Remember mercy. God comes from Teman, the Holy One from Mount Paran, Selah. His splendor covers the heavens, and the earth is full of his praise. His brilliance is like light rays are flashing from his hand. This is where his power is hidden. Teman was a part of Edom, which was an area southeast of Judah. And Paran was a mountainous area southwest of Judah in the Sinai Peninsula. So taking these things together, basically the whole southern region below Judah, this would have been part of the wilderness that the Israelites traveled through for 40 years. So taking these references together, he is taking them right back. He's taking everything back to the Exodus, when God gave the law and led the people through the wilderness. And he says, God, your presence was like flashes of lightning to them in a storm. It was brilliant. He is focusing on the glory of God. In verse 5 to 6, plague goes before him and pestilence follows in his steps. He stands and shakes the earth. He looks and startles the nations. The age-old mountains break apart. The ancient hills sink down. His pathways are ancient. Pestilence and plague are pictures of divine judgment. And for the Israelites would have also called back Egypt. The eternal mountains, they are viewed as the very foundation of the earth. They shake in God's presence. Habakkuk is describing this power held in check when God appears. Everything, even the mountains, are frail before him. I see the tents of Cushan in distress. The tent curtains of the land of Midian tremble. Cushan and Midian were Arab tribes living near Edom. They were nomads, and he's picturing them camped along the line of a march of a terrifying enemy. The Israelites and God in the wilderness. Are you angry at the rivers, Lord? Is your wrath against the rivers? Or is your fury against the sea when you ride on your horses, your victorious chariot? He is recalling a time when God used his power over the very rivers. The Nile in the Exodus being turned to blood. Or the Jordan River when they were traveling to the promised land and God stopped the river flowing so the ark could pass by in the book of Joshua. And he calls people to remember God also using his power over the very sea when he demonstrates his greatness and allows the Israelites to walk through on dry land. He says, God, you rode your chariot of salvation and you brought deliverance to us in the land of Egypt. You took the sheath from your bow. The arrows are ready to be used with an oath. Selah. You split the earth with rivers. The mountains see you and shudder. A downpour of water sweeps by. The deep roars with its voice and lifts its waves high. It says, God, you unsheathed your bow. The bow in the ancient world symbolized power and warfare. The word he uses here is the same word used in Genesis 9 when God says he puts his bow in the sky, his rainbow. That was symbolic of God sheathing up his bow and hanging it up to show that he would not make war on the earth again in that same way. And now Habakkuk says, we see God picking up that battle bow that he laid aside in the past to destroy his enemies and rescue the Israelites, and in the future to destroy the Babylonians. He's drawing connections here. God, you did this in the past. I know you'll do it in the future. And he sees God striking with an awesome force. And he calls our minds back to the flood, where God unleashed the deep and destroyed wickedness, but rescued Noah, the faithful. Sun and moon stand still in their lofty residence at the flash of your flying arrows, at the brilliance of your shining spear. The sun and moon standing still. Now he's recalling Joshua's victory at Gibeah, when God caused the sun and the moon to stand still while Joshua and his army fought, and he gave them victory. God is pictured as a mighty warrior fighting for them. The imagery here, the wording actually makes it seem as though the sun and moon stood still because they were hiding from the power of God. Now we go into verses 12 and 13. You march across the earth with indignation. You trample down the nations in wrath. You come out to save your people, to save your anointed. You crush the leader of the house of the wicked and strip him from foot to neck. Selah. Like an ox tramples the grain on the threshing floor, God has trampled their enemies in the past. He has marched out for their salvation. He has delivered them many times, destroying the wicked. He's going to do it again. God, you crushed the head of the house of the wicked. It's likely that he means either the Pharaoh of Egypt or the leaders of Canaan when they entered the promised land. It says, God laid them bare and stripped them from foot to neck. It was a thorough, devastating defeat. You pierce his head with his own spears. His warriors storm out to scatter us, gloating, as if ready to secretly devour the weak. You tread the sea with your horses, stirring up the vast water. Once again, he's referencing what God did for them in rescuing them from Egypt, and what God is going to do to all his enemies in the end. And then he closes this section of prayer with verse 16. I heard and I trembled within. My lips quivered at the sound. Rottenness entered my bones. I trembled where I stood. Now I must quietly wait for the day of distress to come against the people invading us. Habakkuk says, I'm afraid. I know and I understand that hard days are ahead. The Babylonians are going to invade Israel, and it is not going to be pleasant. In fact, it will be terrible. But as you have been faithful in the past, I know you will be faithful in the future. I know that your wrath will fall upon them. And God, I embrace what you're doing, even if I still have a hard time grasping it all. Let's summarize all of that. Habakkuk prays after being told to wait. And he starts by saying that he has heard of the great works of God, and he is in awe of them. He knows that God is all-powerful, all-seeing, and all-knowing. He understands what God has told him, and he understands that difficult days are ahead, so he calls upon the mercy of the Lord. And then in 3 through 16, he recalls the incredible things that God has done in the past. And Habakkuk is reminding himself, and all of the people who came after him and would read it, and us as readers, that God has been faithful and just in past generations. He basically makes a list and writes it down. And the beautiful thing about what he did is that now it's something that can be remembered by us and all the generations following. God's faithfulness in the past is the basis for hope that he will intervene in the future. That's how Habakkuk maintained his hope. So, what do we do? Well, first of all, obviously, pray. This whole thing was a prayer. So praise God for what he's done. Recall his magnificence. And ask him to act again as he has in the past. And ask for his mercy. And then, on a very practical level, remember God's faithfulness. We're going to talk about this in the, big picture and then the personal level. Big picture. Look at the Bible. We all know what a Google review is, right? Or something similar. It's a pretty powerful thing. It's useful. Many people go online and look at these reviews when they're choosing a vacation resort or a new restaurant, a doctor, a plumber, some product, maybe even a church. We want to know the experiences of other people. Why? Because past performance can be a good indicator of future results. The same principle is true in our faith. The Bible is a story of the redemption of humankind. It's a story of God's holiness and his faithfulness throughout history. We can read the Bible and see his faithfulness. And we see ultimately that God can be trusted. When we see God's faithfulness in past situations, By reading his Bible, it gives us hope for present and future situations. So look at the Bible. See what God has done for his people. Dwell on his power and his majesty. Look at the promises he has fulfilled and use that as hope for the future as you wait. Use that as hope for God's intervention in world events. Use that as hope for God's intervention in your life. Use that as the hope that the promise of Jesus' return is real. Use that as hope that the promise of heaven and a resurrection is real as you wait for these things. And then once you've looked at the Bible, look at your life. Stop and think about the times that God has been faithful to you in your life. How has he helped you in the past? I don't think we give God enough credit. He does something for us, and we might acknowledge it briefly, or we might not, more often than not. And then we just kind of move on. There's a Chinese proverb that says, the faintest ink is more powerful than the strongest memory. Can you see where I'm going with this? How many wonderful memories or thoughts, memories of your children, profound thoughts about the Bible or about the world, how many of these things have you forgotten? Might not even know. So write it down. So here's my advice. Start journaling. Write down experiences you've had in God's presence. Take notes in church and when you read the Bible. Write down the things that God has done that you are thankful for. And make note of answered prayers. You never know when these moments may be the very thing that the future you needs to read or hear. And so now there's a challenge. Go home this afternoon and take some time to think. Write down some promises that God has made and fulfilled in the Bible. That's one. And then write down some times that God has acted in your life. Two simple things. Write them down. And then share it with someone. Talking about it helps make it more real for you. And then, after you have that start, keep it going. Journal. Make notes throughout the week about the ways you've seen God acting in your life, because someday that might help you maintain your hope. It is so easy to just trust in ourselves and our circumstances when everything is going the way we want. And it's easy to forget that every breath is a gift from God. We like to think we're in control, but we really aren't. Bad things happen and will continue to happen. So the more familiar we are with the goodness of God in our everyday lives, the easier it will be to recall his faithfulness when he seems distant or unfair, or life is difficult, or you're suffering and you have to wait. If you practice remembering God's faithfulness, so many things will happen. You will develop, in general, a more thankful and humble heart. Your joy will grow. It can't help but grow if you dwell on the faithfulness and actions of God. And your hope will grow, and it will grow to be strong enough to last. You will be prepared when things get hard if you focus on the faithfulness of God and make yourself familiar with it now. It's so much harder to remember in the moment, but if you remember it now and prepare yourselves, your hope will stay strong through the waiting and through the struggle. So please, go home and try this today. If you put it off, if you're anything like me, you'll just forget about it and it won't happen. Find a quiet place, piece of paper, with your Bible. Write down the things that God has done in the Bible, the ways He's fulfilled promises and been faithful. And write down the things He's done in your life. And then once you have that foundation, continue to make notes throughout the rest of the week, throughout the rest of your life. Remembering God's faithfulness is the key to maintaining hope while we wait.